So Kansas has voted on whether they will consider abortion to be continue to be a right within the Constitution. How should we feel about this? Does this tell us anything should concern us going into the midterms? And what does this say in the general state of how the nation feels about abortion? Let's talk about it. All right, so I'm sure you're aware by now, probably if you followed the news the last day, we're being told that Kansas's choice to vote yes on a amendment that was very, in my opinion, confusingly phrased, is this referendum on what the midterms are going to look like. That this is telling us that they're sending a clear sign on what the people want for the midterms. So, in fact, we don't give an example of this.
But on Tuesday, Kansas had its own message to send, delivering a stunning FU to the right's shock and awe campaign against bodily autonomy. It was a testament to the desire for abortion rights in this country, in one of America's reddest states with even rubier red pockets, rural, conservative, MAGA, where voters resoundingly rejected a ballot measure that would have allowed lawmakers to ban abortion in the state. In much clearer terms, the right to an abortion will remain in the Kansas Constitution, a state constitution, by the way, that in its original form was built on opposition to slavery.
Now, when they're saying it's going to remain in the Constitution, this is based on a court decision. Yet again, another time that a set of judges determined that this right existed somewhere. And so it was never a pass, there was never a piece of legislature put forward that enshrined abortion access, killing children access into the Constitution. This was determined by a set of judges. And the way this should have appeared on the ballot should have been much similar to that, like, is abortion rights up to state legislature or judicial branch? They should have put something like this versus it being phrased like, should Kansas Constitution be amended to remove protections of abortion rights? You know, it was the way that this appeared on the ballot. I'm trying to get a sample ballot so I can make sure that I'm portraying this fairly, but I believe it was something along these lines. It was really, really poorly phrased. This was poor form. Not great move, Kansas. But on top of that, this claim that, you know, they gave this resounding FU, like, it was never in the Constitution. It was determined by judges, and this could have been something they could have really effectively gone at incrementally by making sure it was shifted to the legislature versus the judge bench, and then approach it from there. So, but more importantly than the specific strategy in Kansas, is this a referendum on the midterm? Is this going to show a groundswell of support for the Democrat Party? Are they going to rally behind this issue? I'm going to still say no. And I think the important things to remember specifically about Kansas, it's different than most other places. Kansas is kind of weird. When we say, like we saw in the statement, we keep being told by everybody, Kansas is super red, ruby red, super red Kansas. Yeah, not really though. So here's what's interesting on this. Let's get over here. This is Kansas's last judges. We went from a Democrat, then we had a governor for 4 years. Then we had a Democrat for, 6 that left for an Obama appointment. And, I mean, we're talking, this was like an extreme activist judge. And that term was completed by Mark Patkinson. Then we had Sam Brown back, and then now we got Laura Kelly. So, yeah, Kansas has some right-wing sentiments, especially in fiscal policy. But Kansas is unique. Kansas is ultimately, it's a populist state. It's always kind of been a populist state. Historically, it was even like kind of left-wing populism. We can look back. We can go deep into Kansas's heritage and look at the early populist movements. So when we look at the early populist movements in, the late 1800s, abolishing national banks, establishing graduated income tax, preventing foreign ownership of land, limiting working days to 8 hours, freely coining silver, giving the government controls of railroads, telegraphs, and telephone companies. So what was interesting is we had, you know, this combination of some of these would be viewed as right-wing now, and some of them would be viewed as left-wing populism. But it was just general populism. And what's interesting is a lot of the sentiment hasn't entirely changed. Again, it's why what you see out of Kansas is a switch back and forth between governorships. If they view one as feeling corrupt at the time or too close to this establishment, they will generally veer the other direction. And this is just how Kansas has been. Kansas is not the South. It's not the Bible Belt. It, again, fiscal conservative leanings. It's very agrarian. But even in the agrarian, it's kind of like, it's like a lot of Bernie bros. You know, like so Trump happened to be a populist candidate, but if it weren't Trump in this recent election, it wouldn't have surprised me to have seen some of your right vote go to Bernie were he the Democrat candidate. That would be entirely unsurprising in a state like Kansas. And again, there's this correlation because it's voted red consistently in its presidencies that it's a somehow like beacon of conservatism. And again, it's just more like right-wing populism. And you know, like we can look at this on, you know, one of these major culture war issues, which was concealed carry. And in just 2004, we had the governor that vetoed the concealed carry. We eventually had to override it with the state legislature, but this was 2004. You have a Kansas, super rural, crazy rural Kansas governor that would veto a concealed carry bill. It had to get overridden by the state legislature. So Kansas isn't as right wing as they think. It historically does in presidencies, but even in its presidential election voting patterns is kind of weird. You look at 92, Ross Perot nationally at 18.9, but in Kansas, 27%. You know, Kansas usually gets a pretty strong independent turnout. We see 6.5 here for the governorship. Kansas seems to get some pretty strong independent, and again is more of a populist state than like the Bible Belt or the South, which is going to be like religious right. And we can see that with, we look here, religion in Kansas, with 6.3% being Baptist. When we contrast that with, let's look at like right next door, Missouri, where you got 14% that are Baptist, and then you go south, Alabama, 35% of, you know, the state's Baptist. And so Kansas just isn't that. And so it's kind of not really surprising. And when we look at this, let's see here, I was looking at some data points on this, and the abortion one really shouldn't have been surprising. So if you look for the last 20 years, the polling has indicated that Kansans are generally in favor of having some basic access to abortion. So incrementalism would be the strategy to go in the state, and that incrementalism should have included just basically moving it to a state legislature issue, making it clear that it's not going to be a judge issue, and then moving it to the legislature, and then incrementalism from there. Instead, what we got was the, majority, Kansas for 20 years polling in this direction. And what we got was, because in my opinion, some of the phrasing of this question, you got people that voted no. And again, so let's look at the one question being asked is this because they're rallying? Is the left rallying behind this issue of abortion? Again, I'm going to say no. And the reason I say that is I looked at the turnout of, let me see if I got these up here, 2020's turnout, Republican versus Democrat, and contrast this with our turnout in the gubernatorial races. And what I found was we had a return to a vote of 59% of Republicans that showed up for the primary. And for Democrats, we had 49% that show up to the primary. So what that means is we had more Republicans return into this midterm, which was not, was actually, it was a surprise how many people turned up, period, in the midterms. You usually see a big shrink of that. But the midterms had a strong turnout. But what we see is that we had a stronger turnout of Republicans. And then Now, this is assuming obviously there's going to be some flux between parties. There's going to be some movement there. But again, if I'm looking at by ratio percentage, what we saw is the Republicans had a larger by ratio against the last election turnout than the Democrats did. So what this tells us is there were people on the right, people that would vote red for fiscal reasons or, just right-wing populist reasons, that are also either generally okay with abortion or they didn't like the phrasing of this legislation. Kansas has a big, anti-institutionalist bend, being populist. That's why they favor these independent candidates from time to time. This was the wrong place to put the phrasing of a bill, whether I like it or not. There we go. Whether I like it or not, phrasing of this bill in a way that seemed authoritarian. I would say arguably in a good way, but Kansas was a rough place to do that. And so what we see is that it wasn't due to increased turnout of the Democrat Party. I do not believe. I think we see that more Republicans by ratio turned out. What happened is some of the Republicans happened to be in favor of not changing abortion access, which again, to me, not really a surprise. Kansas is kind of a weird state. But on top of it, the one other thing that's a big one to remember, and this should be a lesson to a lot of us, is it's hard to beat the rural centers. Let's see here. I have this map. If I can find, let's see here. If I can find the map, let's go here. Yeah, so when we look at this, when you go across the west, Kansas, what I did see, I will say this, I did see less rural voters returning, and but really high return on the urban population. So what seemed to take place here was that rural people maybe didn't show up to vote, but Republican or otherwise, people did in the urban areas. And the urban areas is what voted for the abortion. And again, we look at, for instance, Douglas County, which has got ending at 81% in favor of killing babies. You don't have anywhere in the rest of Kansas that even has that ratio, even amongst red areas. I know this particular map right here is confusing. It's because blue is yes and red is no on the vote, but the no vote meant yes to killing babies. See, even that was also confusing. The way this was phrased, the entire thing is just confusing. Do better next time when you get stuff put on the ballot. Make it less confusing, more clear. But when we look at this, yeah, so Kansas, we can call it super, super red, yeah, because it's a red legislature. But when we look at it, you're going to have, the urban centers are blue and progressive, and very much so. And the thing is, Kansas doesn't have a red city. It has deep blue cities, and you look how really low populated a lot of the rest of the state is. So yeah, our state legislature is super red, but what's going to happen is when you get some of these statewide popular votes, it's going to be really, really, really hard to beat out the city. And especially if somebody wasn't a single issue voter over abortion in a right-wing populist state like Kansas that largely goes fiscal conservative and is worried about things like health care, which is a weird mix. This is just an unconventional mix for a red state. And so what you see here is most people in this, in this whole rural belt, though they are consistently against abortion, that wasn't a thing they were willing to rally over and go out and vote. And we did see a decrease in total voter turnout in the rural areas versus the urban areas where it stayed a little bit more consistent. And so I think Kansas isn't one that's really largely surprising to me. If they really wanted to make this happen, we should have gone at a little bit different approach and how it was listed, and then working more aggressively to rally rural areas. but I don't think we saw an increase in support of the Democrat Party because of this issue. It's just that Kansas, yeah, it's red, but it's a weird state. And it always has been. It's been this way for 100 years. It's a unique state. It's not the Bible Belt. It's not the Deep South. It's not a Christian conservative place. So keep on the gas, keep forward. We'll keep ending abortion, and we'll just have to go at this one more incrementally. We're not done. We're by no means done. We're just getting started. We're a few months into the big change of tide on this issue, and so let's not let this one particular place, this one issue, be demoralizing. Kansas is a strange one. We should have really approach this one differently, and we will get it. We will get there. In the end, we will not allow innocent children to be killed in our country. This is a hill worth dying on, so we're going to keep pushing for it. And do not let this one minor bump for now, because of a bunch of kind of weirdos in Kansas, mess you up, or convince you otherwise. So let's continue. It's all going to be all right.